Hello, everybody. James here. Ho, ho, ho. Merry Christmas and all that kind of jazz. When's this coming out? The 20-something? It's the 20-something this podcast is coming out, so Merry Christmas in a couple of days, whenever that is, before we get going. We have things to sell. Too late for Christmas now, sadly, but we're still going to plug them. 2 books for me. First, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, the People's Champion. I've written that book on Amazon. It is available. Descriptions has the links. Owen, Hart, King of Pranks. Links in description. And Dutch, you've got 2 as well.
I do have 2. These are The World According to Dutch and Tales from a Dirt Road. I wrote these books, I don't know, several years ago, but the stories are still just as good today as they were then because they're old stories that will be lost unless they're written down and continued onward in a written form. Mm-hmm. So, and you can get these books on Amazon, but they're not signed. But if you want them signed, if you'll just ask me at Dirty Dutch Mantell with 2 L's on gmail.com, and I will put in here to Bill or James or Hackenschmidt or whatever your name is, and I will sign this. And I not only sign it at Dirty Dutch Mantell, but also sign it as my alter ego, Zeb Colter. So you actually get 2 autographs for the price of 1, and in both books. So great reading, by the way. If you read some of the reviews on these books, I've never read a bad one. The lowest I ever got was like a middle mark. Most of them are like 5 stars. And I even had Stone Cold Steve Austin says that he usually would take a book and he'll read like a chapter or 2. But he said, "God damn you, Dutch." He said, "You son of a bitch." He said, "I started reading your book," and he said, "I couldn't put it down because every chapter is self-contained. It's not a long, drawn-out, linear, process of what I've done in my career. It might be talking about 1985 in Puerto Rico. Then I'd talk about 2003 in TNA, or I would talk about in the 90s when I was with WWE. But it's just, and it's not all me. It's just other stories with other guys, and pretty interesting. I mean, actually, I pick this book up sometimes and read it back to myself, and I forgot what I'd written, and actually sometimes I'll laugh out loud. It is a funny book. So, a Dirty Dutch Mantell with 2 L's at gmail.com. You won't regret it. Yeah. One more thing. Mm-hmm. I have a thing called the University of Dutch. There is the official diploma from the University of Dutch. And this is, James, this is you.
I know, it's been there for about 5 months now. I want it on my wall.
Yeah, well, I got to actually see, this paper's kind of thin. I put it on thicker paper, and it comes prepared to hang, and you'll have your name. Whatever your name is, it'll be right across here, and you can hang it on your wall. So when somebody comes in, or another wrestling fan comes in, and they ask you, "Well, what do you know about wrestling?" You say, "Well, look here." And there's your name, University of Dutch, and your graduation date stamped, signed, and what do they got? Nothing. So actually, you one up them right then. So write to me at Dirty Dutch Mantell with 2 L's at gmail.com. I'll get right back to you. So, and I'm going to reprint you one, James. I want you to send me your address, and I'm going to send it to you.
Yeah.
I know I've said that 10 times, but I will.
You gave me your address once and gave me 4 completely different numbers to your house number.
Well, you have to learn that when sometimes you're getting information from me, you may be able to trust it and you may not. So
I know this is another old Ricky Gervais show, but a girl asks Ricky Gervais for his number in whatever show it was. And he goes, "Yeah, it's 07, all the 3s, 29, and you know the rest of it." And then he just walks off. He gives him about 6 numbers out of 11 and then walks off.
Hey, the show that he made last about his wife dying, and
I've not seen it. It's meant to be fantastic.
It's great. I mean, he has such a way of connecting to you. He don't really give a crap because his wife had just died, but he's still funny, and he's still he really jams people, and he's funny. I think I love his comedy routine. I mean, the people that want to cancel people like Dave Chappelle, they would like to cancel Ricky. How you say his name? Gervais. They would like to cancel him, except the fans won't let him. They find him hilarious.
Mm-hmm.
And he's almost like a guy that, and very few people have this ability, is to connect to people in a way that you just can't dislike him. Because he didn't want to be disliked anyway, but he could be. He'd be a great heel. But I really like his show, and I forgot what his show was called about when he lost his wife, and he didn't give a crap. He didn't give a shit if he got fired. I mean, what was it? And you really feel sorry for him because what does he have to live for? He's lost his love of his life. They didn't have any kids or anything, but then you see the wife in her later days. She's really, really sick, and she doesn't have long. And they did that show right. They did it good. So I highly recommend it. So if you can find it, watch it.
I'm trying to look.
I think he did 2 or 3 seasons of it.
I'm trying to look at what the damn thing's called. Is it Afterlife? Afterlife. There you go.
Afterlife. And he's in some small English town. I guess they have thousands of them there, just like in America. And he works for like a little paper. I mean, he's not really imported into town. He's like a reporter or something. And but it's enjoyable and it's I like shows just like 30-minute chapters or 25-minute episodes. You can live with that because they can put a lot in 25 minutes that sometimes they stretch into an hour and it gets boring. And he did this, and I think he wrote it and produced it, but he did a great job.
He's probably still a better reporter than either of us two, but we're going to move on. Before we ask any of your questions, fans, you wanted to talk about Jack Hart, and you sort of described him as the reverse Goldberg. Why?
Well, before I get to that, we reported on this, like that word. We reported this last week that joining us soon, right here on Storytime with Dutch, is my old buddy, Mr. Jack Swagger. Going by a different name now, Jake Hager, which is his real name. And he's going to join us, and I've had him, I had another podcast, had him on there. He's entertaining as hell. So I don't know if it's going to be next week or the week after, but within the next 2 weeks, hopefully we'll have Mr. Jack Swagger here live and in person, and I'll ask him some stuff. And don't miss this one. Jack is really a good interview. So, okay, now on to your question.
Jack Hart.
Jack Hart. I did put on Twitter, and some of you people will remember this, and certainly you'll remember the angles from it. But I took and I used Goldberg because Goldberg, he would go out there and he'd kill people in about a minute. But what I did was I took Jack Hart, who was when I booked Florida back in the 80s. He called me one day and I said, he said, I'm from there and I really want to come home. And, you kind of like him just talking to him. He's a good guy. I said, okay. But I didn't know what I wanted to do with him. So I brought him in, and I finally figured out his gimmick. His real name is Barry Horowitz. You may remember him from WWE as Barry Horowitz. But I brought him in as Jack Hart. That's what he said his name was. I didn't know anything about Horowitz. But he was the one who couldn't win a match. It was in reverse. And we made it work for itself. Here's a guy that can't win a match, but yet at the same time, he was trying to be a heel, people hating him, and it took on a life of its own. And he would lose to everybody, get up and he'd cry, and you felt sorry for him. And this went on for about, and I left Florida. I went to Oklahoma to watch his territory. But it was an enjoyable piece of television work. And we'd always put his record when he'd lose a match. He started out, he was here about 3 weeks, and we'd start him out as 38 losses and 0 wins, and or zero win, 38 losses And every week when he lost on TV, we would add 2 to it because usually the people would see him wrestle in Orlando or Miami or Tampa because nothing was going to change. He was still going to get beat. I think we ran his record to like 130 something consecutive losses before he finally won. But when he finally won, Paul Bearer, which was later on the Undertaker's manager, and what was his name, Doctor?
Was it Percy Pringle the third?
Percy Pringle, and then what was Undertaker's manager? What was he called?
He was Paul Bearer.
Paul Bearer, okay. And he wanted Paul Bearer to manage him, and finally he got down. He lost the last match, and Paul Bearer got in the ring, was frustrated with him, and slapped him. And then he slapped him again. Now the fans are saying, hit that. Because Paul Bearer had a little steam on him. And finally, he hit that Paul Bearer in the little studio. It only hold like 75 people, 100 people at the most. They exploded. And then some other guys run in, and that Paul Bearer was managing too. And he ran out in the street just to get away from him. Mm. His final interview that day was, he says, and Gordon Soley interviewed him. He says, what are you going to handle this deal with Paul Bearer? And he says, I may not be able to beat another swinging in the state of Florida, but one person I know I can beat is I know I can beat him. And he got him over. So then he went from being in the first match to being, actually, if he finally later on, he was main eventing. Good worker, and they took that angle, and actually ended up, when he went to WWE, they actually talked about it, that what he did. And so it's funny, if you do an angle in Florida and WWE hears about it, see, there's no such thing as copyrights on angles or patents or anything. They could just copy it if they wanted it, and they did. They put him on there, and I don't think they did a good a job with him as I did. But he kind of got over there a little bit. And then Memphis ends up using it because I was there. Then Oklahoma used it, and somebody else used it. So it's just it's a Goldberg in reverse, and it's a heel that you're trying to get people to like, to turn babyface. And it works on its own. It gets over on its own gas. So that was the angle with him, and he did great in it.
And it was in WWF, he finally beat Chris Candido, of all people, and then Hakushi, I believe he beat as well. So they actually did the exact same storyline in WWF in '95.
Yep. And I think I did it with him about 10 years earlier.
What territory was this when you did this? Was it Florida or?
Florida. And it worked good. Because it's not a 8-year-old kid can understand it. That's what you want with angles. You want kids that they're not lost in the angle. And they could understand it. Their parents could understand it. And it was good entertainment. So everybody could relate to it. And he was looking for a win.
And a very good worker, I believe, as well. He's highly touted.
He's really a good worker. He really is. Not very big, and he's a smart ass. If you're talking to him on the street, you'd want to punch him. But he doesn't mean anything by it. It's just the way he is.
We will move on to our first question from a fan, and Professor Farnsworth has asked, recently Eric Bischoff on Twitter agreed with a fan sentiment that AEW is not mainstream. Do you think there are some AEW fans out there that actually believe AEW is mainstream? And do you think WWE has any real mainstream value outside of its previously established stars like Rock, Austin, Flair, Cena, etc.?
Okay, let's take the subject of AEW by itself. They were getting mainstream back about a year ago when their ratings were up around 1 million people. It's not a bad rating, really. You get 1 million people, dedicated viewers. But they were getting to be mainstream, and then all of a sudden, the tire came off the wheel, and it started careening down the road, and it was out of control. So Even the people trying to behind the wheel didn't know where it was going. As far as WWE, does it have mainstream appeal? Yes, it does. Because you can pick up a lot of publications now, especially on the internet. If you show any inclination at all that you follow wrestling, that algorithm is going to send you that stuff. And it's more and more and more and more. So if anything happens in the wrestling world that they think you might be interested in, they're going to make sure you get that piece of information. With The Rock going as mainstream as he is, I think he's the hottest actor in Hollywood. John Cena's doing really, really well. Batista's doing good. I don't know what other actors they got, but these guys went mainstream. So, but where would they be without WWE or Vince McMahon? They might still be in there, but not to the level they are right now. Rock and Austin and Batista and Cena were real life action heroes. You know, when you start selling those action figures of these guys, that means they're pretty well over. And they're not making them for their health, they're making them to make money. So I guess they made a ton of money every Christmas with them, and they put out new ones every year. So, but I think WWE is probably 3 times, 4 times has the mainstream value more than AEW has right now.
I would argue, so none of my friends watch wrestling, have any interest in wrestling whatsoever. None of them. And if I mentioned Roman Reigns to them, they wouldn't have any idea who he was.
What's wrong with them?
I'll tell you what.
Bastages.
They know, I'll tell you what, they'll know Hulk Hogan, they'll know like The Rock or some famous, and they'll know the Bushwhackers. And that's it.
Okay. But they do know that wrestling exists.
They'll still call it the WWF.
Well, they should catch up. You should educate your friends a little bit. Or the next time they come there and act stupid, just reach across and just open hand slap them. Just to get their attention.
Well, the point I'm making is that I think the first time in WWE history since it was national or international, Roman Reigns isn't as big a star outside of wrestling than John Cena was. And I don't think people who have no interest in wrestling would know who Roman Reigns was, but would know who John Cena was.
And that's because of Hollywood. Yes?
I'd say before he went to Hollywood, I think people still would have known who John Cena was, because more than anything else, they know the "you can't see me" thing, which Cena popularized. And that's probably where people know Cena from who are outside of wrestling.
Well, the thing these guys got working for them is they're on TV every week. Every week. And I think I said this last week. Somebody's surfing the channels, especially at the top and bottom of the hour. And if you notice that at the top and the bottom of the hour, WWE is not in commercial. Never in commercial. Because their plan is to catch people that are surfing. So say at the 9 o'clock hour on SmackDown, all the people are doing station identifications and they're doing ads or whatever. Not WWE. Their segment will start about 3 minutes or 2 minutes to the top of the hour. So when that top of the hour hits, they're in something. They're in a match or they're in an interview, because they don't want somebody surfing across. And if you're searching for stuff because the other channel's running commercials, you're not going to stop on Raw if they're running commercials too. That's what you just try to get away from. So, and that's been their mode of operation for as long as I can remember. Especially a live show, catch them in commercial, and hopefully you keep them.
Next question from I think you work with him, Nick Dinsmore, aka Eugene, and he asks,
Eugene,
when are you going to talk about Rinka King from India?
You ever heard about that, Mr. Roberts, Mr. Romero, Mr. Roberts.
It's Robert Jesus. Yes. I know vaguely about
Well,
Ring of King.
Well, we all went to India 2011, I think, 2012. Went down in December, went home, then went right back. We was there for like 2 weeks each time. So I was down there a month at the end of 2011 and 2012. We went in because an Indian network called Colors, I think is the name of it, they wanted to have a wrestling show that they didn't want WWE and they didn't want any other syndicated show like Ring of Honor or anybody else. They wanted their own show with Indian wrestlers, Indian performers. So Jeff Jarrett was the head of, or he wanted it. They heard they wanted it, and he got interested in it. So they worked the deal and brought us all down. And we trained. We had 2 trainers, and Nick Dendemore that just wrote this question in. He was one of the trainers. Him and Savio Vega. Most of these guys had never had any wrestling experience whatsoever. The first tape we did, the guy that went out, was the first time he ever worked in front of people and with the camera. And I think he actually went out there with Densmore because we had to have great coaches and great trainers, and he was one of them. And we ended up, I think our first show, I'm not sure of this, but I think we did like 20 million people because it was new. Of course, it dropped off after that, after they after they saw the show. But it was well produced, and it's called Ring Ka King. Ka King, I don't know. I guess it's King of the Ring, I guess, is the translation of it. But we had actual Indian wrestlers that performed on the show with Americans. And it was I think we did 1 year. That's all. I don't know what happened to the second year, or even if they had a second year. I think they had a second year, but with a much cheaper outfit, and the wrestlers weren't as good. But Ring Ka King was, I mean, we flew into New Delhi, and then we went to about 30 miles from there. It's called Pune, India. That's where we taped the show. And it's still on YouTube. You ever watched it?
I've never watched it. I think we've talked about it briefly. You said that they were terrified of Scott Steiner.
Oh, yeah. Scott Steiner would hit the floor, and they would run and fall over each other because Steiner is terrifying when he goes out of the ring. You don't know whether he's playing or not. And those people would just run, and he'd pick up a chair, and they'd all run up. Oh, they was killing each other running from him. But it was actually a pretty entertaining show. We had Indian announcers, and we would announce it in, I guess, Indian. I don't know what language they had. They have several there because India is a very, very big country. Mm-hmm. India has maybe more people now than China. Mm-hmm. I think China has 1.3 billion. I think India is right there at them and may have surpassed them at 1.4 billion. And I was thinking about that one day, 1.4 billion people. That's 1 billion people more than we have in the United States. How do they feed that many people?
Well,
I don't know.
They don't feed that many people.
I don't know, but the people I found out in India are very, very friendly, very nice. And you've heard of the caste system there, correct?
Yes, low and high caste, yeah.
Well, to relate that to people, it's a discriminatory system that has been in force in India for generations, correct? Mm-hmm. So, but I found them very, very nice. And, you would think that people from England or the US or UK or Germany, they would go down there and just treat those people like crap. That's not it. It's the Indian people treating their own people like crap. Because I've seen, I was like a restaurant one time, and they had a boss there, Indian, and he had some people working. Oh, he would just holler at them, scream, throw stuff at them. because they were the working class, and he was allegedly, I guess, their boss, their higher up. I treated them like crap. And when he said something, they moved. So, but that taught me something right then and there, that caste system does have some truth to it. But it's not, they want to say now it's like, the colonizers, like the English and the Americans.
I was going to say, we treated them like crap for hundreds of years.
Well, but England than the UK, England more than anybody else. They actually loved the English there, because I heard several Indians just in conversational dialogues. I would sit down and start talking to them. They said, we wish the English were still here. I said, why? They said, things worked when they were here. I mean, the trains were on time. Everything worked. And then he says, when the English left, he says, the sturdiness and the systems failed. And that's why they say they wish the English hadn't left. I don't know if they really mean that, but they said that when the English were there, and I don't know when the English left, they left
about 46, 47, something like that.
I think it was in the 60s, I think.
Well, we sort of dissolved the British Empire, because I think after World War II, it was like, how can we have an empire when we're stopping Germany have an empire? But that was the official story, but the actual reason is that we were economically depleted and we couldn't run all these other countries anymore because we spent all the money on fighting Nazism.
Well, anyway, I got an education over there, but Ring to King, let's get it back to wrestling now. James, you need to stop this all over the place.
I always bring it back to the war.
We need to talk wrestling. We don't need to talk about pre-World War II China or whatever we're talking about.
Well, let's take it back to wrestling. I'm going to ask you exactly what were your roles in Ring to King? Were you just producer? Were you creative director? What else did you do?
I did about everything. I was on the creative team. I wrote. I produced. I booked. We had matches and we had agents. Sanjay Dutt, who's in AEW right now, he was one of them. Eugene, the gentleman who sent this question in, and Eugene, I never thanked you, but thank you very much. You've made my job a lot easier over there. Savio Vega and Abyss. Abyss was one of the agents. He was there. So it ran pretty smoothly. And we would start, and we did like, we would have, we would go down there for like a week, maybe 8 days, and we would go over everything we had to do. And then the last 2 days, we would do the taping. And the taping was, we'd let a crowd in there. And one time we made a statement like, there's too many guys in the crowd. Oh, too many guys. Oh, okay. The next day it was nothing but women. We said, no, we don't mean that, guys. We mean we need like women and men. Oh, okay, we got it. But it was and they would advertise for extras, and they paid the crowd to come in. And it wasn't much. It was like $5. And you would come in there, and they would feed them too. They would come in there and they would spend like 4 hours there, and they were the crowd. But when you told them to get excited, that's what they meant. They wanted you to be excited. And if you weren't, they had watchers out in the crowd. We'd go over and say something to them and tell them they wasn't going to get paid when they left if they not a little more excited. And then they would get up. But the crazy way they did things there. But everything worked well. The people, as the Indian people, very friendly, very nice. The only thing I didn't like there is when I checked into the hotel, you know those things they check underneath cars with, see if there's a bomb there?
Yes, the big mirror on a stick thing, yeah.
Brother, I saw that and I freaked out. I said, what the hell have I got into now? They got these terrorists that's going to blow the hotel up? So I was always watching out the window when I was going somewhere. And traffic in India is unbelievable because they got those three-wheelers like little tricycles, but they're motorized. And you have a driver and
Tuk-tuk. Are the tuk-tuks, aren't they?
is that what they call them?
Yeah, those little taxis, the three-wheel taxi things.
And I mean, lanes like lines in the middle of the highways, they don't mean anything.
Just advisory.
They're just suggestions that maybe you need to stay over here and horns out the yazang. Beep, 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 beep. And you think, somebody blowing the horns like a little irritated, but they're not irritated. What they're doing, they finally told me, said, you're telling the guy next to you you're there. Beep, 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 watch out, beep, beep, I'm here, which made sense. So if you had two lanes going this way, it was going to be three lanes regardless. And some of those trucks, they didn't have lights. They didn't have brake lights. They didn't have nothing. So if you weren't aware out driving on an Indian highway, I don't care where you were, you had to watch out. You could run into somebody. But yet at the same time, I never saw an accident the whole time I was there. I never saw one. So the first time I saw a shanty town, you've heard of shanty towns?
Yeah.
They're like, you got this 3 acres over here, and you got these high-rise buildings around it. Then all of a sudden, you see this like homeless encampment, basically, is the best way I can describe it, because the people that go in there to live, they don't own it. They're just there. And it's nothing but like plywood walls and, like tents or, burlap thrown over a doorway or a roof or something. Horrible. And one morning I got up and it's foggy as hell. I went, damn, it didn't feel that humid. And I asked somebody, does it get foggy like this a lot? They said, no, man. That is not fog. That is smoke. I went, what? Because the people living in the shanty town, they didn't have gas. They didn't have electricity. They had wood. And they would build a fire to cook or to stay warm. You got a little chilly there sometimes, I guess. And it would just knock you down, the smoke. And you couldn't see because it looked like fog early in the morning, but it was really smoke cooking breakfast. So it was different. And the people, they didn't know what to think of wrestling, but liked it. And I think later on, who was that big giant in WWE?
Great Khali.
Khali, he went in later and ran a few shows. And he drew like 60,000 people. And I don't know who was sponsoring or how he was doing it, but he would go to stadiums and he would do well. It's crazy.
Next question, Bill Holtz. Good morning, gentlemen. I greatly enjoy the podcast. When Dutch was in WWE, was his pay itemized? In other words, did he get details of how much of his income was from pay-per-view, merchandise, house shows, etc., or was it just a monthly amount?
What's his name?
Bill Holtz.
Bill, what are you, an IRS agent? So if you're not, you have no right at all to ask me about my finances. But I'll answer it anyway. Paid weekly. Very weekly. I would get a notice of that, or some kind of piece of paper on how much I got from sales of merchandise or some kind of tape or something. But when it's allotted down, it was like 0.5% or whatever. I guess because my spot on it wasn't that important, I guess. Most of the people, say they signed for $500,000 a year. And of course, they ran all these house shows, and it didn't matter what they paid them because it was going to be made up or tallied up at the end of the year anyway. And say their sales or their house show events only amounted to, say, 325,000, then they would add in the merchandise. Then they would add in the other stuff. And if they had any to make up, you'd reach your 500,000 mark. But if you had a 500,000 mark and you went over that, it was highly, highly possible you could end up making $1 million. But when they first started, that wasn't Vince's MO, because one of the first contracts I signed back for the old WWF, yes, it only guaranteed you a yearly income of $1,500. Then after that, if you wanted to work for somebody else, you'd have to call them up and get their okay on it. And I was saying, what the? But if you want to work for them, if you're in no position to negotiate, you'd have to talk to them about it. And if you weren't that important to it, they'd just say, no, we don't even need you.
We've got a second person with a similar question, so I wanted to lump them together. Johnny says, hello, guys. I love the show. Quick question. Please ask Dutch, in the territory days when wrestlers were paid only based on the total gate that fluctuates from town to town and territory, how did the wrestlers finance houses or even cars without a consistent proof of income?
A different era. I'll say that. I think sometimes when I bought a couple of houses, they ask you what you made per year. You just put down a figure. And they just made sure you had a job. I think that was the extent of it. Even with the car, they would call up where you're working. Hey, does so-and-so, does Dutch work there or whatever? Yeah, but he said he made this. Yeah, it sounds right. Okay. And that was it. That's how they do it. It was a different era. So now if you tried to do it, they say, are you kidding? Get the hell out of here. You can't do this. You can't buy this because you haven't shown proof of a consistent income or job, really. So that's how they did it. Any more to that question?
No, that was it. I was just going to add as well that back before 2008, you could get mortgages, 105% mortgages. So instead of a deposit, they'd pay the entirety of the house or give you the loan for the entirety of the house, plus 5% of the house, so you could get yourself some furniture.
Yeah, I remember that too.
Yeah, good days. They were good days. I'm going to move on. Jason Erickson. Thanks, Dutch, for answering my question in advance. Can you talk us through the mini ECW invasion at the In Your House 10 pay-per-view in Philly, where a number of, this is in 96, I believe, where a number of ECW wrestlers were sat at ringside? It was a strap match between Savio Vega versus Bradshaw, with your good self on the outside, when Sandman spat beer on Savio before security ushered them out. Were you told what was going to happen beforehand? Gerald Briscoe apparently was not told and was ready to stretch some guys.
Well, I remember that quite well, to tell you the truth. They didn't tell us anything in the back. That's called kayfabing your own people. If anybody should have known, it should have been me, Bradshaw, Savio, and Gerald Briscoe. By them leaving Jerry Briscoe out of the loop is just astonishing to me. He was right next to Vince all the time during those days. For them not to tell him, that meant that Vince kayfabed him personally, didn't tell him anything. I think what he was saying is they're out there, so let's watch them. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, why wouldn't they just throw these guys out? Oh, well, I forgot, I guess we was in Philadelphia somewhere.
Yep.
Everybody kind of knew them. But it was about to break down into a big fight with Bradshaw and me and Savio out there. When they spit on Savio would whip that whole bunch by himself. If he'd have went over that gate and he did a couple super kicks, they're out. And why they didn't clue us in, I have no idea. Because we could have probably made it look better than what it looked. Now we're out there, we're saying, wait a minute. And I had a feeling that, well, by them not telling us and the ECW guys being as bold as they were, it kind of tipped me off. That's why I didn't do anything. And Bradshaw didn't know about it. I didn't know about it. And Sabio, he said he didn't know about it. This is the first I'm learning about that. Briscoe didn't know anything about it. But that was right before I think we were trying to work a deal, or Vince was trying to work a deal with Paul Heyman and ECW. But you got to clue people in. I mean, what if it had been a fight out there and somebody got hurt? What if I'd have got hurt? I'd have sued them. Because if they're not going to provide security from me, but they didn't think anything like that would happen, I'm sure. I mean, they didn't think far enough on it. But all they would have to do is just right before we went out there is tell us they're out there, guys, and we're trying to work a deal with them. So act like you're mad at them. That's all they had to do. And we could do the rest.
I watched the video actually just before we started recording, and Savio, right, Sandman spits beer in Savio's face, and then he does the headbutts the can sort of thing. But Savio I thought Savio was in it, knew everything was going on, because he sort of does like a bit of an exaggerated sort of.
Well, he may have known. Is all I can say. They may have told him because something was going to happen to him out there, but they didn't tell me or Bradshaw. And apparently they didn't tell Jerry Briscoe either.
He was out there straight after. He was the one who actually broke up the sort of confrontation between Savio and Sandman, Tommy Dreamer, and Paul Heyman, whoever else was there. And apparently there were other ECW guys dotted around the arena as well, because Paul Heyman was probably telling them they were going to war.
So there goes the argument about, is wrestling fake? That right there was not fake. It was unplanned. Nobody knew what was going to happen. What happened, and it could have been a lot worse. I mean, it worked fine, but it could have been a lot worse by not telling people. You know, if somebody gets beer spit on them and you're on camera, I mean, if Savio hadn't have known that, they'd have been blows exchanged. Yeah. There would have been some hands thrown.
I mean, it's embarrassing. So, I mean, if you feel like you've been embarrassed in front of a national, international audience, you're going to very likely do something about it, unless you knew about it beforehand. And
the thing about Sandman, his gimmick of being a drunk was a shoot. He was always drunk. He was drinking all day long, all the times that I knew him. I brought him to Puerto Rico. He was drunk at 10 o'clock in the morning. And he'd just keep drinking all day long. I guess he had it down to a science by then that he knew he could drink so many beers before 12 and so many beers to 6. And then from 6 to 12, I guess he had a different scheme doing those party hours. But I remember we brought him in one time and Sabio said, "Hey, why don't we just go out the door and start fighting with those guys?" I said, "No, I won't." I was booking. I said, "Let's let Sandman go around and do his deal." And he said, "I don't know. I don't know if they'll buy it here." I said, "Well, I think they will." And he went out. That was the best part of the match. Of course, the people are going to stand up, yeah, and then they're pouring beer on people, and they love that. And then he had it took him 5 minutes to get into the ring. Then he had a 5-minute match. Then 3 minutes to get out. So it was like a 15-minute whole segment, but was entertaining. And I went to the back. Sabio says, "Well, next time I disagree with you, tell me to shut up. And we'll just do what you want to do." He said that worked great because the people enjoyed it. So when the people went out the door that night, they were saying, "You know, I really like that Sandman deal," because they could identify with him. And that's what you want. Any booker that books a show, he wants the people, when they go out through the door, he don't want them saying, "That was the living shits." He wants them saying, "Damn, that was pretty good. I enjoyed that." Now you might have a fan. You have a fan that would always come back. In Puerto Rico, I always had a scheme of things. Babyface is over basically to make the people happy. Then you got your heat. Then you beat them up. You did this, you did that. You run somebody in. I was down there 3 years and they never really popped to it, what I was doing. But and especially in little spot shows, not towns that are regular, you always put the baby faces over because you don't want any trouble in these little towns. You don't want that because you don't know what the police are like or anything. So you make the people happy. I always believed in finishes because give the fans what they paid for. They didn't pay for a DQ, but they would work every now and then if you didn't overuse it. But if you give them a finish, that's what they paid for. So they would have no bitch going out the door, and you want them going out happy. That's why I put on my hot stuff. I put it on early because you know who taught me that idea? Carlos Colon in Puerto Rico. The hottest thing he would have on the card, and when I was there, it was me and Frankie Lane, the dirty Americans or whatever, cowboys. He didn't put us on last. And I asked him one time, I said, that's the stupidest thing I've ever seen, Carlos. Why would you put your main event on fourth? And he told me something that I wanted to shake his hand on later. He says, if we wait till the end of the night to put on our hottest act or angle, he said, we're not getting out of the stadium without getting somebody hurt. He says, by that time, they're all drunk, and they were. And he said, they would kill the heels. He said, I'd have no heels. So he put it on fourth before the people got really hammered and really, mad and eager to kill you. Put it on fourth. And I thought he was the smartest man in the world after that. I said, that's some ingenious thinking that he did. And I thanked him for it.
Is that why you ended up having to put Sandman on first? Because he was like the fans, he'd get drunker and drunker and drunker as well.
Well, I don't think I put him on first. Did it say first?
No, I've made that up. I just sort of assumed that you saw how drunk he was maybe 3 hours later and you thought we'd best get him out there early.
Well, he was okay drunk because if you see him drunk, sometimes he wanders around. He don't know where he is. But I forgot the Harris brothers told me one time, they was in ECW Arena. And I forgot what was going to happen. Sandman was supposed to run into the ring at a certain point. But he got so drunk, he forgot his entrance point, and he came out about halfway into the match. And they didn't know he was coming. And this is Don Harris telling me, he said he had a chair. He said, he hit me so friggin' hard. He said, I've never been hit that hard in a bar fight. He said, I turned around and he said, I started beating the living shit out of him. And then Ronnie, his brother, saw that he was upset with Sandman. They kicked Sandman's ass from the ring. These were the heels. They kicked his ass all the way back to the dressing room and left him. And then went back and finished the match. Then they come back. Then when they come back to the dressing room, they were still mad. They was going to beat Sandman's ass again. And Paul Heyman saw how mad they were, and he told Sandman to go ahead and leave. But he was drunk all that. But the people accepted that. That's what they expected out of him. I think I put him on that night, not last. I think I put him on like third from the last. But he was still drunk. It didn't matter that much anyway. Because in Puerto Rico, everybody was drunk. Not me, because I I don't drink that much, but everybody was hammered. That was the damnedest place I've been in my life.
We shall move on. This fella didn't leave a name, but he did leave an interesting question. Dear Mr. Mantell, could you talk a bit about your time with Gordon Scozzari, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, American Wrestling Federation, December 1991. Multiple people, including Scozzari himself, have credited Pez Whatley and yourself for saving the AWF TV tapings when Gilbert, I'm presuming Eddie, no-showed. And he adds, did you ever work with Scozzari when he was in Puerto Rico? And what were your thoughts on America's Wrestling Federation running opposite the World Wrestling Council? Thank you for your time.
I don't remember those last two. I don't even remember Scozzari that much, to tell you the truth. I went up there to do the show, and I forgot where it was. Eddie was supposed to be there, Eddie Gilbert. He didn't show up. Now they didn't know what to do. And I don't know how in the hell I ended up kind of helping them do the show. And then I recruited Pez to help me. And if it hadn't have been for us, I'm not saying I'm taking credit for it, but at least the show got off the ground and ran, and it wasn't too bad. I mean, it's hard to get a show 30 minutes after you get there. You had nothing to do with putting it together. I don't even know what they wanted to do or what they wanted to come back or whatever. They never told me. They said, let's just do the show. I said, okay. So we put it together and stuck it out there. It was one of those, I mean, fly by night deal. You put out there what you got and hope that it's enough. And maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. Scazzari in Puerto Rico, I don't remember him. And who do you say the World Wrestling Federation running against who?
So, no, it was AWF. This is the same promotion running opposite the World Wrestling Council.
What year was that? Does he say?
He mentioned the year 1991 in the previous paragraph, so around then, I'd presume.
Well, I wasn't there in 91. I was still in my boycott of the Bruiser Brody incident. I didn't go down there. After the Bruiser Brody thing, I stayed out of there for like 6 years, maybe 7. But by that time, WWE had made they had just thrashed, literally like exonerated, I mean, not exonerated, but demolished every, what I call mom and pop territories in the country. I mean, Florida was done. Texas was done. Oklahoma was done. Memphis was still running, and Puerto Rico. Actually, it's ironic that those were the 2 best territories I ever worked in. I made more money there than I made anywhere else. I think the Carolinas were done. Chic was done. All of them were done. So the only reason I went back when I did after the Bruiser Brody incident was, hell, I either worked there or I didn't work anywhere. So, but it was a crazy time, and I don't remember them. I remember some people going in there trying to run against Puerto Rico. Why, I don't know. I mean, it was a great territory at one time. It had about 4 million people there at one time, or 3.5 million people on the island. I think now it's down to under 3 million because a lot of people just had to leave. I mean, they can't get jobs. They can't do this. They can't do that. If they had any kind of a trade, like a doctor or, a nurse, or they just left the island and went to Florida, I guess, or went to wherever they could get a job. And why wrestling territories kept trying to go there, I don't know. Just because of the past, they'd look out in the crowd, they see like 16,000 people. I don't think you could give 16,000 tickets away in Puerto Rico right now. You can't do it. I think Puerto Rico's been wrestled to death. And I think I had the last hot run there was with, it was called IWA too. That was with Victor Quinones. And I went in there, and guess how I booked it? I started drinking. I said I didn't drink in the 90s. I went to Puerto Rico. Then I started drinking. I would go down to the beach on a Monday, and we'd only work like 3 days a week. We worked Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and we'd do our TV on Saturday night. I would go down there on the beach Monday morning about 10 o'clock, 11, and I'd take me a bottle of Malibu rum, and I would sit down there in my little lounge chair, and I'd stay out there 3 hours, and then I would take my little, I call it Senora Malibu, who was my assistant booker. Assistant Malibu had some great ideas. And I would take the ideas that he would give me on the beach, and I would take it back. And it was kind of warm out there on the beach. It'd be like 90 degrees. I'd get back to my apartment, turn that air down as low as it could go. Then I'd write the show. And then I would perfect it from, Monday to Thursday. We do interviews on Wednesday. I kind of had it all in my head then. But nobody knew what I was going to do because I didn't tell anybody. Because I left myself room to maneuver on a dime. Because if something happened during the show, so somebody got hurt, I had to change it on the fly. So, and I don't know how many times I did that, and every show was good. We would go to a little place outside San Juan. I forgot the name of it now. It seated about, I guess, 2,500 people. we'd sell that out every week. That was like a regular show. But then when we would go to the stadium show, they would seat between 14 and 16,000. And of course, I would bring in some people for that. I'd bring in the Steiners, or I would bring in, Sandman, or I'd bring in Jeff Jarrett. And I would just bring people in, not because I really needed them, because I just wanted it to look like a bigger show. And man, we'd sell it out. You go, Jeff Jarrett, he came down there one day and he's looking out there. Place is jammed. And he says, "What are you doing here? How are you doing this?" And I went, you know what I said? I don't know. I said, I don't know. I think I said this. I said, I don't know. Lucky, I guess. He went, "Bullshit. You're doing something." And that went that way probably about two years strong. We used to have weeks, and this is just under regular pricing. We would have some weeks of $125,000 just ticket sales on 3 days a week. Of course, the big night was Saturday night, but that was a lot of money. Just that, and they had the gimmick sales and the beer sales. So anyway, it did really, really, really well. And I would go out and sit in the dugout, and I said, I wonder how this, before I would start booking anything, I'd walk in about, I don't know, 7:30. Show's supposed to start at 8:30. Show would start usually about 9:23, because nobody's on time in Puerto Rico. The fans aren't even on time. I mean, if you tell somebody 8:30, that could mean anything from 9 o'clock to 9:45. I mean, they call that Puerto Rican time. That's what they call it. Even people laugh about it. Oh, that's Puerto Rican time, So I would go in there, and before I would even give any finishes out, I'd go in there and I'd order me 2 beers and 2 margaritas. And I would sit there and I'd drink the margaritas first because it wasn't as much. Then I'd start on the beers. And by the time that I got pretty well relaxed, well, okay, let's start handing the stuff out. And then I'd hand it out. And my assistant there was Luke of the Bushwhackers. And we would meet every Saturday morning about 10 o'clock, even though we lived right next to each other. We would go down to Denny's and we would have like a pre-match get together. And Luke would look at me, and he was in a bad mood. He said, "Matey, what do you want to do tonight, matey?" And I said, "I don't know. Just put the baby faces over." "Well, mate, hey. He'd get all excited. I said, What? He says, "What about Legendo versus Blitz?" And we had a guy named Blitz. And he had worked this long, drawn-out finish. I said, No. Put the baby faces over and don't work anything kind of difficult. Just put the baby face over so the people are happy and get them out. I said, now later on, when we decide to do something with him, we'll do it. But okay. And I would let Luke handle, like, I don't know, the first 5. We'd have like 7 or 8 matches, 7 maybe. He'd handle the first 4, and then I'd handle the last 3. Because that's all I wanted to work with is the money matches. And just put the baby faces over, which was a pretty good system, if you ask me. You don't got to worry about doing anything later on in the night that they've used in a preliminary match, because you just had straight up finishes. And it worked great. It worked good for 2 years. So, and we had, that was Victor Quinones. You know who he is?
You ever heard of him? Yeah, he was sort of a guy with the WWF as well that he helped transfer talent back and forth.
He started there. We started in Puerto Rico. I knew him years and years and years ago. And then he got in with Gorilla Monsoon somehow. Then I think they went to New York, and he worked with Gorilla there. And then he went back to Puerto Rico, and he always had a part of the Puerto Rican office, and I never knew how. But and I finally found out later that his parents had a bunch of money, and they had invested in the company, in the early days. And so did Gorilla Monsoon. So did Abdullah. And I didn't know this, I don't know, till a couple of years ago, really. I knew about Gorilla, but I think after Brody, that the thing happened with Brody, I think that's when Victor pulled away from him. I think he had points in the office, but didn't even talk to him, didn't he collect on any money or anything. The business after Brody went to shit, though. It stayed down for, I don't know. Actually, it stayed down to I got back there, really. I mean, they were doing okay, but filing bankruptcy during that time is not doing okay. And they had filed bankruptcy during that time. I had gone back there and didn't know that. And then Carlos told me they had filed bankruptcy. I said, what? I didn't know you guys filed bankruptcy. Oh, yeah, I thought you knew. I said, bullshit. Mm-hmm. I didn't know. Why would I want to work with somebody that's, file bankruptcy? That doesn't speak very well of your business outlook. So, but anyway, it is what it is. I didn't really enjoy my time there, but I got through it.
Well, Senor Malibu, the guest booker, would have helped you warm you up a few times.
Great booker. Had great ideas.
I think we've got time for a few more before we go. Jeff says, hi, Dutch. Would it be possible to talk us through the final few weeks of Chris Candido in TNA before his passing due to complications after Sonny Siaki accidentally broke his leg in a cage match?
Well, the only thing that I know, there's nothing really to talk through. I remember it happening, but nobody would think that he broke his ankle, right? Or broke his leg.
I think he broke his leg.
Nobody would think that a broken leg would result in a death. Because I didn't certainly think that. The thing about Candido, I really liked that kid. He loved wrestling almost to his detriment. He liked it almost too much. And he had put in I'd known him a long time, but he came into TNA and he had that accident and laying in the back, took him to the hospital, and they told him not to fly because of the leg. I don't know what that does, but I think it can cause death. Maybe not while he's flying, but he flew up there against doctor's orders, against medical advice. And he got there, and I think 2 days later he was dead. But he was dead because of the flight. Now, maybe I have that wrong, but he died as a result of the broken leg and flying. I do know that. So, and that's all I know about it. But I do know that his brother contacted me about a year ago. I forgot his brother's name.
Johnny
Candido. And this was right after Sonny had that accident on the east coast of Florida, mm-hmm. when she hit this 75-year-old man. Now, that 75-year-old man, was he in a car or was he walking?
No, he was in a car. Sonny plowed into the back of his car.
And killed him. Yep. And he was still upset about Skip, Candido, Chris. And he was telling me what a piece of crap she was. And because I had already went on my Facebook. I don't rarely post on things like this, but I have no sympathy at all for drunk drivers or incapacitated drivers. I just don't. Because my granddaughter was killed by one. So if they can, and that's why I suggested, I think Sonny should get 10 years. She had been convicted of a couple of times before of the same thing. And I think Jeff Hardy should get 10 years too. He didn't even kill anybody. He just got arrested for just being drunk again. But he had been caught 2 other times within 10 years in Florida. And I think that's what he can get up to 10 years. they have delayed his trial for some reason. And Sonny, I don't know what's going on with her.
Well, I've got a tiny bit of an update on that. Is that I can't remember if she fired him, but anyway, she's lost her latest public prosecutor, and they're trying to find another one for her.
Well, that's because she raises hell and cusses them out. She's a mental case. It's hard to believe that Sonny started out such a pretty young girl, a pretty young lady, and ended up in what she's looking like now and acting like now. I think she has some serious mental problems caused by, I guess, I think she was kind of spacey at first, and then all the drugs she took and the drinking she does. And she's prone to throwing fits and actually attacking people, hitting people, and she's nuts. So I think if they don't take her off the road, what they're doing is asking for another death or her death. But what I'm worried about is other people's death. You know, if you really stop and think about it, you're driving down the road and you have no idea how close you are to death. That car coming at you could be somebody just about ready to pass out. But you never think that, because if you did think that, you couldn't drive. So that's what you got with Sonny. If she gets out, she gets behind the wheel of a car, she's she's done this before. What would stop her from doing it again? Unless she's punished. The prison system for that, or the jail system for that, is not to punish her. It's to protect the rest of us, to keep her away from us. So if you got her in prison, you know she's not out getting drunk and driving down the highway. So she's a loaded gun just ready to go off. So I'm very interested in what her sentence is going to be, because I have no sympathy for her whatsoever. And I have no sympathy, and I like Jeff Hardy. I like Sonny, but I have no sympathy for what they do and what they've done.
10 years would be too low for what she's done and her past for me.
Yeah, the guy was 75. He's lived his life. I got that. But it's not up to her to dictate it. That's up to a higher power. And Jeff Hardy, he could have easily killed somebody too.
We will do a couple more. Didn't leave a name again. Please leave your name when you're sending in a question, because I don't want to read your email out. I recently rewatched the angle of Kevin Sullivan debuting as the Master in Smoky Mountain Wrestling. One thing always got me is that you cursed, saying, "This shit ain't gonna air." Did Jim know you were going to curse, or did you okay it first? When did you guys realize the mic wasn't on or working post the attack?
Well, I forgot. I remember it well. But the arm didn't bleed. I don't know why. I mean, he cut him right around I think here, but it wasn't a lot of blood. And I'm thinking, damn, is the guy human? But I forgot whether Jimmy okayed that, because I'm sure I wouldn't have said that on my own. I think he says, talk like you would normally talk. What he was saying, Dutch, cuss if you want to. He said, we're going to edit it anyway. And they did. You know, you could see the X's, going across the arm. And that was, I guess, Smoky Mountain's way of editing the kids seeing it. It was gruesome. It really was. So I'm thinking, this Japanese guy comes all the way from Japan, all the way to LA, then to Atlanta, then to Knoxville, then to get in the car and drive 4 hours to this mountain town to do TV, or wherever we were, to cut his arm, or have Sullivan cut his arm. And I'm thinking, damn, what are they paying this guy? I mean, I don't know. But it was pretty damn gruesome, really. Me and Bob Caudle, and I love working with Bob Caudle. He's the greatest. I mean, if you have a color man, have the color man do all the bullshit. And then Bob Caudle would be the straight guy.
He was a reassuring voice, wasn't he, for many years?
He'd say, well, Dutch, what are you saying? And I would do some more of my bullshit. But he would give me time to talk and time to, it was entertaining, actually. But I've heard like J.R. Ross and Heyman, sometimes they would go at each other, see who was going to have the last word. And neither one of them won. But that was JR's, that was his style. That was Heyman's style. But me working with Bob Caudle, it was a pleasure. It's like working with Lance Russell. You know, they would amplify what you're saying, but in a more subdued tone, in a more reserved, civil tone. And he left all the crazy, wild, extravagant things that I could say, which marked a big contrast between us. Bob Caudle, I think, one of the most lower underrated announcers they've ever had.
With Kevin Sullivan, I didn't realize how long he actually spent in Smoky Mountain, and what did the fans make of him? Because I think they were some of the more, dare I say, gullible fans who, you know, you could tell him pretty much anything, they buy it. And Kevin Sullivan is a psychopath and cult leader. What did they make of him?
Well, he started that psychopathic gimmick in Florida.
With the Thriller entrance as well. I always thought that was such an incongruous theme.
And he had, who was his valet's name? What was her name? He ended up with
Nancy,
and she ended up with Chris.
And what?
Yep. He did a great job within Florida. I wasn't around him that much in Smoky Mountain, but I think Smoky Mountain would have done better, except they didn't have any big towns. Knoxville was the biggest town they had. Knoxville is a spot show for WWE. So he would run like Morristown, and he would run those smaller towns. But if he'd have had towns like Memphis or even Nashville, or towns with 1 million population, I mean, I think he'd have done a lot better. But I don't think the towns were big enough to support the business, to support the company. Who was the guy who was one of the investors? Rick
Rubin.
And he was Rick Rubin. You know, when I found out about that was kept quiet. I don't know why. I don't even know who Rick Rubin is then. I guess you could explain it to me.
He was a music producer, came famous for producing the Beastie Boys albums at first. He's done loads, Johnny Cash.
Oh, he's done everybody. He's done a lot. But I found out about it, and one day I asked Cornette, I says, where in the F, see how I control my cursing on the show. And I asked Jimmy one day, I said, where in the F did Rick Rubin come from? Because I was in LA when I was with WWE, and we had word backstage that Rick Rubin's in the crowd right there at ringside. Of course, Rick Rubin, he remembered me from Smoky Mountain, but he didn't come up and introduce himself. I never met him. But and I asked Cornette, how in the hell did he get into? How did he meet you? And you came up with Knoxville, I guess. How did you get him interested? And then Cornette said he was interested on his own. Said he loved wrestling. He liked how we did it, and that he wanted to be a part of it. And then Jimmy, being the salesman he is, instead of his money, he put up Rick Rubin's money. And I don't know how long Smoky Mountain was in business. I guess, 3 years, 4 years?
Yeah, somewhere between 3 and 4. It was 91 to late-ish 95.
Yeah, well, something like that. But Rick Rubin ended up being one of the owners of the company. I guess Jimmy, and I don't know who else, had a piece of it. But Rick Rubin, even eventually finding out that he owned part of the country, and it was an enlightenment to me. Oh, wait a minute. I have a. You there?
I'm still
There
here.
we go.
Well, while you're
Well-
dealing with that, you do know that the one character that Rick Rubin insisted go on Smoky Mountain TV, don't you?
Yes, the mummy.
Mhm.
I asked Jimmy one day too. I said, Jimmy, wait a minute. I thought you didn't like this shit, and he didn't. He didn't like those extravagant gimmicks like that. But he said Rick Rubin wanted a mummy, and guess what? He got a mummy, and it was Killer Kyle. We put him out there, and Jimmy told him how to act, and he was with Daryl Van Horn, and actually, it wasn't a bad deal, to tell you the truth, because it made him look. It was just, I don't know. I mean, wrestling is wrestling. You take it for what it is. But and I was going to. What were you going to ask me next? I was going to talk about a mummy next.
The Mummy?
The mummy. About it was at South American promotion. I was going to ask you about.
Oh, Titanis NL Ring. Yeah.
Titanis del Ring. I'm sitting in Puerto Rico one day on a Saturday, hot as hell. My window was open because I was up about 7 floors. So the breeze would come into the room. And they didn't even have air conditioning in this building. Can you imagine that? A hotel with no air conditioning. So, but air was coming in. And I'm watching TV, and I'm sitting there because I know I got to go to the matches in a couple hours. And I'm dreading going over there with those bloodthirsty fans. What's going to happen tonight? They wanted to kill me anyway. So I'm sitting there, and all of a sudden, this wrestling show comes on TV in black and white. There's only had a black and white TV, and I was lucky to have that. And they were talking Spanish, which wasn't, out of the ordinary because I was in Puerto Rico. They speak Spanish anyway. But it was the damnedest show I've ever seen. And it's called Titanis del Ring, like Titans of the Ring. And that's when I saw the gimmicks. And they had music, they had lights. They were light years ahead of WWF.
Why don't we watch them now? I can set it up where we can watch a couple of minutes now and just have a quick watch. How about that?
Well, that's where I found. I'll go ahead.
Okay, pausing.
I mean, it's interesting, and it's on the YouTube too. So,
okay, pausing. I'll set it up. Okay, we're back. Right, Dutch.
Well, I'm sitting around my hotel room one day in Puerto Rico, and all of a sudden, this wrestling show comes on, and it's in Spanish. Of course, that's not unusual because everybody speaks Spanish down there anyway. But I don't know any of these guys. It's not WWF. It's not WCW. It's just I don't know where it came from. And I got to watching this show, and I instantly fell in love with it. I said, this is different, and I like it. And I didn't know where it was from because we didn't have Google in those days. This is in the 70s. So where am I going to get information from this? So I started asking around, and some of the Spanish guys or the Puerto Rican guys, they had heard of the promotion, and they kind of filled me in on it. But they had every gimmick imaginable. They had the Shepherd Boy, and they had the Mummy, and my favorite was the Invisible Man.
That's what we were talking about with Ronnie Garvin. That's why it came up the first time.
And I told you I was going to find this for you, and have you heard about this before?
Yeah, we talked about it about a month or so ago. In fact, let's just play it. This is a video on YouTube, which is just the wrestlers' entrances, and low budget doesn't quite. It pretty much describes it, I think. So let's play it. Playing it. Just playing. It's low budget, but man, the crowds are full.
But look, they would tour those big cities in South America, and they would sell out because it was basically a kids show. See the kids?
Yeah,
that's what it was. It was a kids show, and it was larger than life, and they were over in South America, and they ran for 10 years doing unbelievable business. And the guy who ran it was Carvadagian or something. I forgot his name. But he was the booker, and there was your announcer. And actually, the production, I thought, was wasn't bad
that's
for
the
the
owner.
time.
That's the owner.
That's the owner right there. He comes out there, and see that's a studio. That looked like Smoky Mountain to me right there. It looked better than Smoky Mountain, really. And there he is.
There is the mummy.
There's the mummy. That's when I said, "Oh my God, I gotta watch this." So he come out and he gets in the ring and they're announcing all these guys.
Now
and
we've got a leopard man doing some really weak ass flips.
That's the Leopard Boy, I think.
Now
I don't know who they.
This is just a compilation of just the wrestler entrances. So now you come up and
I don't know who this is.
There's some sort of caveman.
Oh yeah, caveman. He comes. Everybody had a gimmick. Everybody comes out there with a stick.
Oh, here we go. We've got a different. Sorry for the audio listeners here. We're doing our best to describe him. So we've got some sort of boy in his underpants with a lady.
What's it
He
say
sounds a
there?
bit like Lenny Poffo, this guy.
He does look like him, doesn't he? That does look like. Look at him.
Sorry, audio listeners. I think you probably just have to watch this. Now, I don't know what this guy is in Mongolian or something. He's got a weird hat.
And none of these guys were like overly big.
Overly
and
talented.
They ran for this.
Either. I've seen some of the wrestling. Shocking.
It was horrible.
Hey.
And there's the sword fighter, I guess.
Yeah, the musketeer. Yeah.
And that was their whole show. But when I was watching this, I'm saying, where in the hell did this come from? And slowly over time, I learned that's one of the shepherds, I think. That looks like a monk. I don't know Spanish that well, so it is what it is.
Let me know when you're bored of this, but I don't think you're going to get bored anytime soon, are you?
And let me see who's the next one.
God, he's on a trolley, this one.
Oh, that's the Roman gladiator.
Looks like. Mannequin?
Is it? Could be the mannequin. But see, they were light years ahead of WWE. And they did fantastic business over the years. I think about 15 years ago, I think.
It's an alien. It's an alien. I've just got it.
I say, oh, what's this?
It's the child catcher.
There's the predator.
It's just Satan.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's enough. I think the people got the idea about
it. There you go. You need to find it. So it's Tetanus El Ring. Oh, you can see it on the screen, for God's sake.
Tetanus El Ring on YouTube. So check it out. I mean, it caught me totally by surprise. And it took me 10 years to even find out all about this. And of course, it took me more. The Google became more, available to people. So I had to check it out. And Wikipedia, that's where I learned most about it. But the ones I liked the most was and we talked about this in an earlier session here, the Invisible Man. Oh, I love that. I mean, if you're just looking at it for entertainment value, I mean, and I could see where the kids would like it because they would go in a big stadium or a big arena and Buenos Aires or wherever they would go, and they'd put 15,000 people full of kids. And that's how they made money.
It's amazing how many people are in. And I've seen another video as well that we haven't watched yet. And a guy comes out in a bowl cut, like leggings, like a Shakespearean actor, holding a rose, looking around. Honest to goodness me, if they told me his character was the paedophile, boo, the paedophile, I would have believed you. Some of the worst characters in the world, but some of the most out there characters as well. It looked like a lot of fun.
Okay, we're going to talk about this next setup we got, and I used a quotation by Dusty Rhodes. He used to say, "If you can't do the shit, I mean, don't try the shit or something." And it's this guy trying to take I don't know what he was trying to do, but he screwed it all up, and it's brutal looking. So I love these. I love these little excerpts of matches that you see. I don't know how the guy survived this.
Maybe he didn't, but there's only one way to find out for sure. Hold on, I'll pause it. Dutch is already laughing as we're not even seeing anything yet, but I believe the Dusty Rhodes quote was, don't do shit that you don't know how to do.
Yeah, something like that.
I ventured halfway into an impression and gave up. Right, okay. This is the worst top rope botch in wrestling history, according to the video. Here we go, 14 seconds long. Dutch, tell us what we see.
We see this guy getting on the top rope, trying to perform some kind of move, I don't know, and he slips, and he falls on top of the steps, and that had to hurt him because he is out. He's got a broken hip, or he's got something. So like Dusty says, if you can't do the shit, don't do the shit.
Well, if you can't do the shit, let's see what you shouldn't do if you can't do it. For a second time.
And he slipped. He turns around up there, slips.
Oh.
And listen, you should never make fun of somebody else's misfortune. But as long as he didn't get killed, I think I can go ahead and laugh at it. Mm. I don't think he hit his head. He did. he did land on his hip. So sometimes practical experience is your best teacher.
Well, don't do shit you don't know how to do. Remember that, aspiring wrestlers or current wrestlers or just in life. I think that's great, a great value statement to make. But for now, we're going to shut the podcast down. We've done everything today. We've done Rinker King. We've done the happy. We've done the sad. We've done Titanus NL Ring. And are we going to do... Well, if you want the plugs, you can go to the plugs at the beginning of the show. Yes, Dutch?
Well, coming up soon, we're going to have the Road Dogg as a special guest, and we're going to have my old friend who I used to manage in WWE, Mr. Jack Swagger, is going to join us. And I don't know if we can. I guess we can use his name, can't we?
What, Jake
He's
Hager?
Jake Hager. Well, we can use Jack Swagger.
Yeah,
that's under 8 seconds, isn't it? Is that what we held to?
Oh, I don't know. I'd say Jake Hager, or FKA Jack Swagger, Jake Hager. Then you could use them both.
Let's see, we can do that. But anyway, we're gonna those. Not only I think it's good for people to listen to on the podcast, I'd like to talk to them myself because I know these guys personally, know a lot of things they went through. I've been knowing them for years, and I think I'm looking forward to it myself. So when we have them, I think you'll really, really enjoy it.
And I think the fans will look forward to it even more because I don't speak on them. So it's just you and the guest.
Oh, that's what I like the best. See, James is not here to argue with me, but I'm gonna say that I think James is one of the best interviewers in the podcast business because he's not trying to talk more than I'm trying to talk, and he makes good points, and I answer them, and we don't talk over top of each other because I've heard a lot of them are talking on top of each other, and you don't know who's saying what, when, or who. Sometimes don't even know who you agree with.
That's partially why I don't talk as much because we've probably got like a half-second delay, and I still catch myself doing it, or we do it to each other occasionally just because of the half-second delay. But it's a funny thing. Is like when I interview people, because I do it with you every week, and I interview other people at least every other week, and I always like to chat to them before we start, just so I can get an idea of the cadence they use and like the natural stops in there. And some people are really easy to predict, like Ken Shamrock. And then other people weren't, like maybe Kevin Sullivan, because he'd sort of stop for a second, and then I think it was safe to go, and then he'd start talking. And anyway, not that I don't love Kevin Sullivan, he was great, but it's something. It's a weird skill that you have to learn, is how to sort of guess when someone else is going to stop a sentence in a half-second delay.
You do it good.
I do my best. Thank you very much, Dutch. But for now, thank you for watching, and we the people, Dutch, will catch you next week.
See ya.